The evening was calm, the sky painted with the last colors of sunset as a young woman walked home from work. She carried 2 grocery bags in her hands, her pace steady, her thoughts simple, just dinner, rest, and maybe a call to her family. She was tired from a long day, but she wore a small smile because she was proud of herself. Life had not been easy, but she had worked hard to build something of her own, and every step she took was a reminder of her strength. The streets were not crowded at this hour. Most people were rushing back to their homes. Cars passed by with headlights glowing, and the shops were beginning to close one by one. She enjoyed these moments of quiet. But on this evening, something felt different. Her smile faded when she noticed a man leaning against a streetlight ahead. He was watching her, not with casual curiosity, but with a stare that felt sharp, almost cutting. At first, she told herself to ignore it. People stared sometimes, out of habit, out of rudeness. She didn't want to jump to conclusions. So she kept walking, eyes focused on the road, pretending not to notice. But as she passed closer, she could hear him muttering under his breath. His words weren't kind. They carried a tone of mockery, filled with a bitterness she couldn't understand. She tried to step past quickly, but then he shifted, placing himself in her way. His body language made it clear he wasn't going to let her go easily. She stopped, her grip tightening on the grocery bags, her heart beating faster. Still, she kept calm. She didn't want to escalate things. "Excuse me," she said softly, hoping he would move aside. But instead the man sneered. His voice grew louder now. No longer mutters, but sharp insults. They weren't just about her being a stranger on the street. They were aimed at who she was, her very identity, her very existence. He tried to reduce her with his words, to make her feel small. For a moment the air grew heavier, as if the entire street had gone quiet to listen. She stood there, frozen between choices. Should she argue back? Should she just run? She glanced around, hoping someone might intervene. But the few people nearby, an old couple on the corner, a young man scrolling through his phone, looked away, pretending not to see. It wasn't that they didn't hear, it was that they didn't want to be involved. That realization stung more than the man's words. She was on her own. The man took a step closer. She could smell the faint trace of alcohol on him, see the way his eyes narrowed with a strange mix of anger and arrogance. He raised his voice again, daring her to respond, mocking her silence. She knew he wanted a reaction, but she also knew that reacting in anger would only give him more power. So she held her ground. Calmly she repeated, "Please, let me go home." Her refusal to engage seemed to frustrate him. His face twisted, and with sudden force, he shoved her shoulder, making one of the grocery bags slip from her hand and fall to the ground. The sound of fruit rolling across the pavement echoed in the stillness of the street. Her breath caught, not because of the push, but because of the shock of realizing how far he was willing to go. This wasn't just talk anymore. The couple on the corner gasped softly but didn't move. The young man on his phone glanced up, then quickly looked away. No one stepped forward. She bent down slowly, picking up the bag, her hands shaking slightly but her eyes never leaving the man. She wasn't afraid, at least she didn't want to show it. She had been through enough in life to know that fear often fed bullies like him. The man smirked as though he had won something, as though her quietness meant defeat. He straightened his shoulders, towering slightly, his body language saying he had all the control. But inside her something shifted. She felt the sting of injustice rise like fire in her chest. She had lived her whole life with dignity, with patience, with the belief that kindness and strength could change people's hearts. But in this moment, looking at the man's smug face, she understood something else. Sometimes silence is mistaken for weakness, and sometimes courage means standing up even when no one stands with you. She exhaled slowly, regaining her composure. She stood taller, the grocery bag steady in her hands again. Her eyes locked on his, not with anger but with unshakable resolve. She didn't know what was about to happen next, but she knew one thing for certain. She would not let him break her spirit. The street felt tense now, like a wire stretched tight, ready to snap. Every second felt longer than it should. The man's grin widened as if he was enjoying the discomfort, enjoying the attention he thought he had. But what he didn't know, what he could never expect, was that this was not going to end the way he imagined. Her heart was pounding, not from fear, but from something stronger, determination. She thought about her mother's words, spoken years ago when she was just a child. You are stronger than they think. Never forget who you are. Those words lived inside her like a quiet flame, and tonight, that flame was about to ignite, as the man stepped closer once more, closing the distance. She braced herself, not with panic, not with tears, but with the quiet, steady readiness of someone who refuses to be broken. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't lash out. She simply prepared, her mind clear, her spirit unshaken. Because she knew, deep down, that strength doesn't always roar. It sometimes stands silent until the exact moment it is needed most. And that moment was coming. The man's shadow loomed larger as he stepped even closer, his eyes filled with a twisted satisfaction. He believed he had control, that the young woman standing in front of him was just another easy target. He thought his size and anger would make her shrink, that she would beg him to stop. But instead, she stood firm, her shoulders squared, her eyes steady, her breath calm. This quiet strength puzzled him. For a brief moment he hesitated, almost questioning why she wasn't trembling. But pride can blind a man, and pride had taken full control of him now. He barked another insult, his voice echoing down the street, like a challenge. His words were sharp and ugly, but she didn't flinch. She didn't give him the reaction he wanted. And that silence, that calm, made him angrier. His face twisted with rage. With a sudden, violent motion he shoved her again. Harder, this time. One of the bags ripped open and groceries scattered across the pavement. An apple rolled into the gutter. A loaf of bread landed near the curb. The scene was almost surreal, like time had slowed down, and yet no one around moved to help. The old couple on the corner froze, their eyes wide with shock but their feet glued to the ground. The young man with the phone still looked down, pretending he hadn't seen anything, though everyone knew he had. Cars passed by without stopping, the drivers catching glimpses but not willing to get involved. It was as if the world had decided to close its eyes. But she didn't close hers. Her chest rose and fell as she steadied herself. She thought of the nights she had spent training in a small community gym, where her friend had taught her basic, self-defense moves. She had never imagined she would actually use them in real life. To her, they had been about fitness, about discipline, about building confidence. But in this moment, standing face to face with a man who wanted to crush her spirit, she realized those lessons had prepared her for exactly this. The man reached out, his hand jerking toward her arm, intending to grab her. But before his fingers could close, she moved. With sharp precision, she swatted his hand away and stepped back, her stance steady, her body balanced. The man blinked in surprise. He hadn't expected resistance. He thought she would cower. Instead, he found himself off balance, his own momentum working against him. "What are you doing?" he snarled, his pride burning hotter now. His voice cracked slightly, not from fear yet, but from disbelief. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. Her silence was louder than any words she could have spoken. The crowd that had once stayed quiet began to shift. People leaned forward, curious now. They had expected to see a scene of cruelty, of one-sided power. But what they saw instead was a woman who refused to back down. Whispers rippled through the air. Someone lifted their phone and started recording. Another adjusted their stance, ready to see what would unfold next. The man noticed this too, and it made him uneasy. He had wanted attention, but not this kind. Still, his ego pushed him forward. He swung his arm, clumsy with anger, aiming to strike her. But she reacted with calm control, leaning just enough to let his fist cut through empty air. His balance faltered, his body lurching forward, and before he could recover, she pushed his shoulder with surprising force. He stumbled backward, his shoes scraping against the pavement, his arms flailing slightly to steady himself. The crowd gasped. For the first time, it was not the woman who looked vulnerable. It was him, his face flushed red, his pride wounded more than his body. He growled in frustration, his hands balling into fists. "You think you're tough?" he spat. Her eyes never left his. "I think I'm strong enough," she replied calmly. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried a weight that silenced the street. The man lunged again, but this time she was ready. She sidestepped, guiding his own force away from her, and with one swift motion she tapped his wrist and twisted slightly. His arm jerked, his body turning awkwardly. He yelped, not in pain, but in shock that she had outmaneuvered him so easily. The people watching could hardly believe what they were seeing. The woman wasn't fighting with anger. She wasn't trying to hurt him. She was defending herself with skill, with grace, with determination. Every move she made was measured, controlled, almost as if she had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times. The man, however, was unraveling. His movements grew sloppy, wild, desperate. The more he tried to dominate, the more he exposed his weakness. Sweat formed on his forehead, his breathing turned heavier. His confidence began to crumble. He had entered this moment thinking he was the predator, but now he looked like prey cornered by his own arrogance. The crowd's energy shifted. People who had once been silent began to cheer softly. Someone shouted, "That's right, stand. Your ground," another yelled. "Don't let him scare you." The man heard this too, and it pierced him deeper than any strike. He wasn't just losing control of the fight, he was losing control of the narrative. For the woman, though, this wasn't about the crowd. This wasn't about proving anything to strangers. This was about her dignity, her right to walk home without fear, her right to exist without being humiliated. She could feel the strength rising in her veins, not just from her training, but from every hardship she had ever endured, every moment she had ever been underestimated, every time someone had doubted her. It all gathered here in this single confrontation, giving her the power to stand tall. The man staggered backward again, his chest heaving, his eyes wide with disbelief. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. He had expected her to fold, to cry, to beg. Instead, she was calm, collected, unshaken. And for the first time, he realized that he wasn't in control anymore. The street, once filled with silence and avoidance, was now alive with energy. Phones were recording, voices were shouting, hearts were pounding. Something had shifted in the air, and everyone could feel it. This was no longer a scene of cruelty. It was a scene of justice unfolding in real time. And as the man stared into the woman's steady eyes, he felt something he had not expected to feel at all. Fear. The street had gone from silent to electric, a mix of fear, tension, and something new, hope. The crowd, which had at first looked away in shame, was now glued to the unfolding moment. They had expected the young woman to fold, to shrink under the weight of cruelty. But what they saw instead was courage that shook the very balance of the night. She didn't raise her fist like a fighter in a ring. She didn't lash out in anger. She simply moved with the calm confidence of someone who refused to be broken. And that quiet power was more unsettling to her attacker than anything else could have been. The man's chest rose and fell with heavy breaths. His pride was bleeding faster than his body. He had started this confrontation certain of victory, but every second that passed pulled him further away from control. His eyes darted to the people filming, to the phones glowing in the darkness, and for the first time his arrogance cracked. He knew what this meant. This wasn't just between him and her anymore. Every move, every stumble, every failure was being captured, immortalized, turned into evidence he could never escape. Still, he pressed forward, refusing to let go of his twisted need to dominate. He lunged again, but his movements were clumsy, desperate, like a drowning man reaching for air. She sidestepped smoothly, her grocery bag still in one hand, as though even gravity itself had chosen to help her. With a small shift of her body, she let him tumble past, his momentum pulling him forward until he stumbled into the curb. He caught himself clumsily, his hand scraping against the rough pavement. He cursed loudly, a sound mixed with frustration and disbelief. The crowd gasped, then murmured. Someone whispered, "He can't even touch her." Another muttered, "She's handling him like a pro." Those words hit him harder than her movements. His image, his sense of superiority, was unraveling right there in front of strangers who now saw him for what he was, a man built on hate, collapsing under his own weakness. The woman stood tall, her chest steady, her eyes never leaving him. She didn't need to shout. She didn't need to brag. Her silence screamed louder than anything he could say. It was the silence of someone in control, someone who knew they didn't need to prove their worth to a man who thrived on tearing others down. He charged again, throwing a wide punch, but she was faster. She raised her arm and deflected it to the side, her stance balanced and strong. The motion wasn't violent, it was efficient, controlled, and deliberate. His arm flew past harmlessly, leaving his side exposed. With one quick push, she sent him stumbling backward again. The crowd erupted this time, not in fear but in cheers. For the first time, people clapped, voices rang out in encouragement. "Yes, that's it, show him he can't win." The man froze. His ears rang with the sound of people siding with her. Not with him. Never with him. It was the first time he had ever felt the weight of public shame so directly. The world wasn't nodding along to his cruelty anymore. It was laughing at his defeat. He turned his head, glaring at the crowd, his face twisted with panic. "You think this is funny?" He barked at them, his voice cracking with desperation. But the cheers didn't stop. Phones stayed raised, capturing every moment. The people he had counted on for silence had found their voice, and every shout was like a nail hammering into his pride. The woman's breathing stayed calm. She wasn't shaking. She wasn't rattled. If anything, she was more centered now than when the confrontation began. Inside her chest, she felt something deeper than anger. It was strength born from every challenge she had faced, from every time she had been doubted, dismissed, or underestimated. It wasn't just self-defense anymore. This moment was about something bigger. It was about proving, not to him, but to herself, that she would never let hate define her life. The man clenched his fist tighter, the veins in his arms bulging. He tried to mask his fear with anger, but his body betrayed him. His movements were sloppy, his footing unsteady, his breath ragged. She, on the other hand, moved lightly, her posture calm, her presence unshaken. The contrast between them was striking. One was unraveling, drowning in his own hatred. The other was rising, carried by her courage. Another attempt, another failure. He swung wildly, but she deflected again, her body moving like water. Fluid, unstoppable, untouchable. His frustration grew louder than his words, a series of guttural sounds that revealed his desperation more than his strength. And then it happened, the moment that changed everything. In his reckless fury, he overextended, his arm flying past her. She seized the opportunity. With a single swift motion, she redirected his force, guiding him off balance. His body tilted too far, his legs scrambled to catch him, but it was too late. He crashed onto the pavement, his palms slapping the ground, his pride scattering like the groceries he had knocked earlier. The crowd roared. Some clapped, others shouted in disbelief. Phones flashed brighter, voices filled with excitement. The man lay there stunned, his mind spinning with humiliation. He had thought himself powerful, untouchable, but here he was, on the ground, looking up at the very woman he had tried to break. She didn't strike him. She didn't humiliate him further. She simply stood tall, her gaze steady, her silence stronger than any insult he had thrown at her. That silence crushed him more than any blow could. He realized, with every camera recording, every cheer echoing, every eye fixed on him, that his story was no longer in his hands. He scrambled up awkwardly, his hands trembling, his face red with rage and shame. But he hesitated now. He saw the determination in her eyes, the support of the crowd, the glow of dozens of phones capturing his downfall. He wanted to strike again, but deep inside, fear began to creep into his chest, a fear he had never known before. For the first time, the predator felt powerless. and for the first time the woman realized just how powerful she truly was. The man's breath came out in ragged bursts as he pulled himself up from the pavement, his knees scraping against the rough concrete. The sting on his hands was nothing compared to the fire burning inside his chest. He could feel the crowd's eyes pressing down on him, judging him, recording him, and he hated it. Every second that passed, every whisper, every cheer for her, cut through him like a blade. This was not how it was supposed to go. He had expected to stand over her in victory, not crouch like a fool while strangers captured his failure from every angle. His gaze darted wildly across the crowd, looking for even one face that might show him support, one person who might see him as the victim, but all he saw were eyes filled with disbelief, with disappointment, with anger. The silence that had once been his ally was now his enemy. The same people who had refused to intervene minutes ago were now united against him, their voices rising, in a chorus of condemnation. He heard phrases he never thought he would hear from strangers directed at him. Coward. Shame on you. Leave her alone. He swallowed hard, his throat dry, his pride collapsing. But his body, driven by stubbornness and fear of humiliation, forced him to act again. He raised his fists, though his arms trembled. He shouted something, though the words barely carried weight. The sound was more desperate than strong. He lunged, forward once more, swinging clumsily, his movements slow and predictable. The woman remained steady. Her stance was strong, her breathing calm, her eyes focused. She had nothing to prove to him anymore. Her strength was already clear. But she also knew this wasn't over. She couldn't walk away while his rage still burned. She had to hold her ground until it was undeniable that he no longer had any power over her. When his fist came forward again, she sidestepped with grace, letting his force slide past her, his body twisted awkwardly, his own momentum nearly toppling him. With a firm but measured motion, she guided him further off balance, and this time he stumbled straight into a puddle near the curb. The splash echoed in the street, water soaking, his clothes dirt smearing his hands and knees. The crowd erupted into laughter, not mocking her but mocking him. His face went red, not from exertion but from humiliation deeper than any physical wound. The man tried to shout over them, tried to demand silence, but his voice cracked, drowned out by the noise. He looked smaller now, his presence shrinking with every second, while the woman seemed to grow taller, her figure framed by the glow of streetlights and phone screens. She hadn't thrown a punch. She hadn't lashed out with cruelty. She had simply defended herself with dignity and, in doing so, stripped him of everything he thought made him powerful. He sat there on the pavement for a moment, dripping with water, his chest heaving, his mind spinning. He had two choices: retreat or escalate. Pride pushed him toward escalation, but fear held him back. That fear wasn't just of her anymore. It was of the crowd, of the evidence, of the truth that was now out of his control. The crowd's chants grew louder. "Enough," someone shouted. "Walk away," another demanded. A woman's voice pierced through the noise. "You don't deserve to be out here treating people like that." Every voice seemed to grow bolder, and suddenly the man who had once thrived on intimidation was now the one being cornered. He glanced at the phones again, realizing the videos would spread beyond this street. His reputation, his arrogance, his hate, they were all being broadcast for the world to see. He tried to stand tall, tried to reclaim his pride, but the tremble in his knees betrayed him. His lips quivered as he tried to shout again, but the words fell flat. His power had drained away, leaving nothing but desperation in its place. The woman, meanwhile, took a slow breath and straightened her back. Her grocery bags were torn, her food scattered, but none of that mattered now. What mattered was the unshakable truth written in her stance. She would not be broken, not by him, not by anyone. She didn't need to strike him down. She didn't need to add cruelty to cruelty. Her strength was enough. For a moment, the two of them stood frozen, the air thick with tension. Then came the flashing lights in the distance, blue and red cutting through the darkness. The sound of sirens rolled closer, growing louder by the second. The man's face drained of color as he realized what this meant. His eyes widened in panic, darting from the lights to the crowd, then back to her. The police car pulled up to the curb, doors opening quickly. Officers stepped out, their presence commanding, their voices sharp. "What's going on here?" one demanded. The crowd erupted all at once, voices overlapping, pointing toward the man, recounting what had happened. Phones were offered up, recordings shown, evidence clear as daylight. The officers barely needed to ask questions. The truth was already written in every word, every clip, every trembling excuse the man tried to offer. He stumbled over his explanations, his voice weak, his words hollow. But the more he spoke, the more obvious it became. His pride was gone, his story broken, his mask shattered. One of the officers guided him to the side, his protests drowned out by the crowd's testimony. Another officer approached the woman, asking if she was okay. She nodded softly, her composure still intact, though her hands shook slightly now that the storm was passing. The man, handcuffed now, looked over his shoulder at her. His eyes were filled not with hate anymore, but with something else. Fear, shame, the realization that his actions had destroyed him more than they had hurt her. He had wanted to humiliate her, but in the end he had humiliated only himself. The woman didn't gloat. She didn't smile at his downfall. She simply stood there, steady and calm, embodying the dignity he could never understand. The crowd around her clapped, some cheering, others offering her words of support. For the first time that night, she allowed herself to exhale fully, the weight lifting from her shoulders. The flashing lights illuminated the street, but in truth, it wasn't the police who had ended this moment. It was her. It was her refusal to break, her courage to stand tall, her quiet strength that had turned the tide. And as the car door closed on the man who had thought he could control her, one thing became clear to everyone watching. The true power had never been his. It had been hers all along. The flashing lights slowly faded into the distance as the police car carried the man away. The street fell into a heavy silence, broken only by the hum of street lamps and the soft rustle of wind through the trees. People who had been frozen with fear only moments ago now stood in clusters, their voices low, their eyes lingering on the young woman who had just faced something no one should have to endure. She stood there quietly, her chest rising and falling, her hands still trembling slightly from the adrenaline, yet her face showed nothing but calm resolve. She looked down at the scattered groceries on the pavement. The bread was ruined, the fruit bruised, the bag torn apart. She crouched slowly and began gathering what she could, her hands steady despite everything that had happened. It was such a simple action, yet it carried more weight than any words could. It was her way of reclaiming normalcy, of showing that, despite everything, life goes on and she would not let hate rob her of her peace. A woman from the crowd stepped forward, her voice gentle. "Here, let me help you." Soon another joined, then another. Within moments, strangers who had once stood silent in fear were bending down beside her, collecting apples, picking up cans, handing her what could still be saved. It was as if her courage had awakened something in them, a reminder that silence only helps cruelty, and that strength can inspire others to act. The young woman accepted their help with a soft nod. She didn't smile, but her eyes carried gratitude. She didn't need to say much, the bond was felt. People around her began to talk, some apologizing for not stepping in sooner, others praising her bravery, still others reflecting quietly on what they had just witnessed. The crowd that had once looked away now stood united, no longer silent but aware, shaken, and changed. The young man who had been glued to his phone earlier finally walked up. His face was pale, his voice uncertain. "I should have done something earlier," he admitted. I froze. She looked at him, her expression calm but firm. "What matters is what you do next time," she said softly. He nodded, her words sinking into him deeper than any lecture could. As the crowd slowly dispersed, the young woman remained where she was for a moment longer. She looked at the street where it had all happened, the spot where she had stood, the curb where he had stumbled, the place where her strength had risen from silence into action. She took a deep breath, letting it all sink in. She hadn't asked, for this fight hadn't wanted it. But when it came, she had met it with everything inside her. And in doing so, she had changed not only her own night, but the hearts of everyone who had seen. Later that evening, videos from the bystanders began to spread online. The clips were short but powerful. They showed a woman standing tall, defending herself with calm precision while a man fell apart under the weight of his own hate. Millions of people saw it within hours. Comments poured in, some praising her strength, others expressing shame that bystanders hadn't stepped in sooner, many reflecting on the ugliness of hate and the beauty of resilience. But she didn't chase fame. She didn't bask in the attention. To her, it wasn't about going viral. It wasn't about proving herself to the world. It was about dignity. It was about the truth that every human being deserves to walk down the street in peace, without fear of cruelty, without fear of violence. She hadn't fought for glory. She had fought for her right to exist freely. Days later, when she returned to that same street, she noticed something different. People looked at her with recognition, with respect. Some even approached her, thanking her, telling her she had inspired them. But she remained humble. "I'm just a person who didn't want to be broken," she would say. And that was the truth. Her power hadn't come from anger or revenge. It had come from the simple refusal to let someone else decide her worth. The man, meanwhile, faced consequences. The videos left no room for excuses, no chance to twist the story. His actions were laid bare for the world to see. What he thought would be a moment of control became a lifetime mark of shame. His name, once hidden in the comfort of silence, was now tied to a lesson he had never expected to learn: that hate destroys the hater long before it destroys the hated.